Hello. So this is going to be fun. I have no speaker notes, and I chose my attire today very poorly, forgetting that I would need a mic clipped somewhere on me. And this dress really just has nothing supporting it. So I'm going to try handheld, which mostly reminds me of singing karaoke, so I'm going to try not to burst into song for you. This is your, brain break talk, because I'm going to teach you nothing about mobile development, nothing about Swift. We're going to talk about the most scintillating of topics, which is engineering management. Very briefly, a note from my sponsor. I work for 2 Sigma here in New York City. If you're unfamiliar with 2 Sigma is a very heavily technical company in the financial hedge fund realm. Our developers use data at massive scale using technologies like machine learning, distributed computing, and other things to make valuable, powerful predictive models. Sorry, that's the phrasing, powerful predictive models. So while I realize that most of you are probably mobile developers and that's not super interesting to you, if you have friends who are into this or if you decide to make a career change, we are always hiring. So check us out. And now, you either die an engineer or live long enough to see yourself become the business person. So my friend Cliff Moon probably tweeted this at some point. He's a very funny guy. And I like this quote to start this talk because I feel that it really encapsulates the stress that many of us feel when we find ourselves becoming managers of engineers. So we worry that we are somehow no longer an engineer, that we're somehow turning into some kind of an MBA business person. And I have certainly felt this. So a little bit about myself. I am an engineering manager now. Obviously, I was a CTO. I am now the head of platform engineering at 2 Sigma. But I spent a very long time as an individual contributor, writing a lot of code, building a lot of different big systems. This is actually a picture from Faces of Open Source, which has a bunch of different portraits of various people who work on open source development. I work on Apache ZooKeeper, among other projects. And so I really love writing code and building systems, and I thought that I was going to do that for my whole career for quite a long time. But at some point I was like, you know what, I want to try something new. I want to go work for a startup. Maybe I want to try managing a little bit while I make this transition. And so I left my big company job and I moved to a small startup called Runway, which is pretty small at the time. And I actually spent a long time as both a manager and an engineer. I wrote a lot of software that may or may not still be in prod today. I don't know if anyone's at Runway here. They can come tell me whether my old code is still there. But as the company grew and as the team grew and as my role grew, I eventually hit that cliff, that sort of dreaded cliff that everybody worries about, which is where it was very clear to me that I had to stop coding, that it was not appropriate for me to spend really any of my time day to day writing code. I wasn't going to be able to write the kind of software that I would feel proud of having other people have to support, have to read, have to work on. And this is a really tough transition for a lot of people, right? We refer to this sort of engineering management as a career change often, right? Like we tell people, oh, you're no longer an engineer anymore. And I kind of appreciate that language because it's right in many ways. Becoming a manager, especially as you become a more and more senior manager, your job is really quite different than it was as a hands-on engineer. But I don't love the whole career change language because my actual thesis in this book that I wrote, that hopefully you will all read because it's fantastic and everyone loves it. No, but you should, it's a good book, especially if you are thinking about becoming a manager or if you are a manager. But a big part of the thesis of this book is that engineering management is, in fact, a technical job. That it is most successfully completed by people who are highly technical, and usually people who used to be engineers, although not exclusively. I believe that engineering management is the intersection of engineering and management. It is not just the people management parts. Now, the people management parts of engineering management are very important, and we cannot undersell those, underestimate those. If you decide to make this change from hands-on to becoming a manager, the people parts will cause you a lot of grief for the first few years. But at some point, you still have to be thinking about those technical aspects. And really, a lot of what you find yourself doing in the day-to-day job is that you're actually guiding a lot of technical decisions. You're not making those decisions yourself. Right? You're letting your team make those decisions. You're letting your tech leads and the other people who are in the trenches make most of those decisions. But you have to guide them. And to guide those decisions effectively, you need to understand the context in which your engineering teams are working in. So we're going to talk about 3 traits of engineers that tend to overlap with engineering managers. And you know, I think these are important traits for senior engineers too. I'll describe briefly why I think they're important for senior engineers. And then we're going to talk about how they play out in managers. So these 3 traits we're going to discuss are debugging, empathy, and judgment. Let's start with the most obvious one, to me anyway, debugging. So hopefully all of you kind of know how to debug. Otherwise, this job is probably really painful and hard and not that much fun. You have to figure it out, right? Like the first line of code you write has bugs in it and it just keeps going from there. And you write bigger systems and you find bigger and hairier and weirder bugs in the way that all of these different libraries and systems interact. And I love that, actually. I find it fascinating. I find figuring out how things fail and why they're failing to be really interesting. And you know, as you become a more and more senior engineer, you do that for larger scale projects, larger scale applications, larger scale systems. But a lot of us also start doing it beyond just the technical. People start asking why a lot. Why is this happening? Why are we doing this at all, right? Why is this the process that we're using? Why can't we actually fix this? Why can't we just really start implementing a retrospective process anyway? What is the big deal? Why is it so hard to get all this stuff done? Why? Asking why too much is one of the things that tends to lead people into becoming managers, right? Oh, you know what? You keep wanting to know why these things keep happening. Well, hey, guess what? Now we're going to make you manage this team and you'll understand why all this stuff is so hard. That ability to see the interactions of many elements, to see how these different complex systems interact and how they break. Some people call this systems thinking, and that's a very important trait for engineers, right? Probably all of you are above average good at it. But as a manager, you also need to engage in this systems thinking. You need to be engaging and thinking about the systems of the ways that people do work, the work they're doing, and yes, the actual systems that are interacting with. The team is slow. Are there any managers in here in the room? Have anybody who's even not a manager, but just had somebody come up to them and be like, why is this taking so long? Why is it taking so long to get this thing done, right? We've all experienced that. And, you know, sometimes you just roll your eyes and ignore them and say, go do your product thing, product manager. Like, you know, like, just leave us alone. We've got important things to do here. But as a manager, this is a very common question. Why is the team slow? Is the team slow? Or are they actually just performing well and we just have unrealistic expectations? It can be both ways. So when you actually think that the team is slow and you actually kind of suspect this could be going better, it's a very hard problem to debug. And it's very hard because there are so many different elements, right? There's people elements. Are the people happy? Are they engaged as a team? Is there some toxic person on the team who's dragging everyone down, either by not carrying their load or just being a very negative person to work with? That happens sometimes. Sometimes the team just hasn't gelled yet, right? They're all still getting to know one another, and they're moving a little slowly because they haven't quite gotten that team cohesion. Of course, sometimes the problem is process, right? I think the speaker before me talked a little bit about how to convince your designer of something by actually making a design, right? The worst thing in the world, and I bet all of you have felt this, is when you're on a team and you've got either designers or product people just throwing things over the wall to you. Just implement this. I gave you this beautiful layout. Can't you just make it work? And maybe that's okay, but most teams, in my experience, they feel kind of alienated by that, right? You want to actually understand why you're implementing the features that you're implementing, what the customer or the user need is for this stuff that you're building. And oftentimes we have these processes that are actually alienating to a team, and they're so far removed from the actual requirements of the system that they can't implement the right thing, right? So you've got to look at the process, because that can also contribute to slowness. And then, of course, last but not least, hey, guess what? Sometimes the code is crap. Sometimes you've got a really old Objective-C application that really hasn't been updated and nobody knows how to use it, and the original developer was really fond of single-letter variable naming, and it's just a hairy mess. And it just takes people a long time to change it, a long time to update it. So you've got 3 different places, and probably more than that, where things can be going wrong in various ways and that can be slowing the team down. A good engineering manager is able to debug these situations and help the team move forward. Okay, empathy. Empathy is kind of like a buzzword now, which is actually pretty cool. I think empathy is a good thing. You know, senior engineers do need to have a lot of empathy. Even like back-end infrastructure people like myself, I'm a platform engineering person, which means I hear a lot about like hardware ordering, things like that. But even infrastructure engineers, and especially application engineers like yourselves who are actually building products that presumably humans are looking at and dealing with, you need that empathy of thinking about, what am I building for? Why am I building this? Who's going to use this thing I'm building? Or who's going to read this code? Maybe you just need empathy for yourself in 6 months when you go to read the code. So empathy is a pretty important trait for senior engineers. And of course it's important for managers, right? Like we have to be, empathetic people, right? We got to be good with people. We got to have that emotional intelligence. But it's actually more than that. So I don't usually like to put walls of text on slides, but there was a study that came out recently that they actually tied believing that your boss was highly competent to employee happiness. It was actually the strongest indicator of employee happiness was that they felt that their boss was great. Now, the title that they gave it was, "Oh, if your boss can do your job." And that's kind of it's actually kind of misleading because the study didn't just look at if the boss could do their job. It was, do you believe that your boss is highly competent in some way? Maybe you believe your boss is an expert in the business domain that you happen to be working in. You just believe that you can learn something from them. Whatever it is, people look for managers that they feel can lead them, that they feel that they can look up to. And frankly, I have to agree with this. I get to work for this guy. This guy is Alfred Spector. He's the CTO at 2 Sigma. He's a fairly well-known computer scientist. Was actually a professor at Carnegie Mellon for a while, started his own company, was a very senior person at IBM for a very long time, and then ran Google Research before coming to 2 Sigma. So this is a pretty impressive dude to get to work for. He's got really strong leadership skills. He's also highly technically competent. Now, that being said, I don't expect him to do pair programming with me, right? Like I don't expect him to, come and sit down in all my meetings and teach me how to manage infrastructure budgets. But I do want to learn from him. And similarly, if you become a manager, your people are going to want to learn things from you. And they're going to want, more than that, they're going to want to feel like you can appreciate the work that they are doing. Do you understand the details of why what someone is doing is hard? And can you speak to that? Can you listen to them and actually say words back to them that make them think, oh yeah, she gets it. She gets why adding this feature is really hairy and I'm having to really work around the system in order to make it work. That's great. We want to be judged by someone who we feel can actually evaluate good from bad in the work that we do. An expert's view is obviously more appreciated than that of someone who doesn't really know what they're talking about. I mean, it's great when your dad is like, good job, kid. I'm really proud of you for having that cool job that pays you so much money and you get to make these cool apps. But it's better when your boss, who actually understands what you're doing, says, wow, I'm really impressed with the clever way that you solved that problem. It makes you feel seen. Now, more generally, of course, we want to know what the team is going to be excited about. You want to be able to predict. You want your manager to be able to kind of predict what you're going to like, right? You probably all want a manager who actually follows what's going on at the WWDC and is like, wow, like that cool new feature of iOS, whatever the heck we're on now, and how like this is gonna like let's like do a hack day where we like add this like location sensitive magic into it so that when you drop your phone and bounces and you pick it up, like our app does this cool, Easter egg, whatever. Right? We all want managers who can kind of like appreciate what we're going to get excited about and kind of hopefully try to steer our projects and steer our work and make sure we get enough of that excitement in our day-to-day. On the flip side, of course, we want managers who can appreciate our frustrations. I don't have my speaker notes, so I'm going to phrase this wrong, but it is hard for someone who has never been an engineer to appreciate exactly what is going to be frustrating. There is a reason that there's that whole manager time blog post that everyone loves to read, because it's actually not obvious to everyone that all these little distractions, little meetings, when you're in the flow, when you're in the mood, when you're in the groove, are actually going to be so disturbing and so upsetting and such a distraction for engineers, right? People need to be reminded of that. It's good to have a manager who's actually done the job and can appreciate those frustrations. Okay. judgment. Technical judgment. All right. Oh, this is going to be hard to do without my notes. Okay, we're going to get it. So obviously you want a senior engineer who has good judgment, right? Who you appreciate, they know how to write good code, they're gonna make good decisions from a technical perspective, they're not gonna lead the team off a cliff, okay? That's pretty obvious, I should hope. A lot of people, I believe, think that you can have a magical trio of technical architect, people manager, who's really good with the people and manages the team, and product manager who sets the product roadmap. And that these three people can co-lead a team to glory. And I have heard of this working, but I think it is very rare. And I think it is very rare for the following reason. The people manager is ultimately usually responsible for the team's effectiveness. I think we would all agree that team effectiveness is probably really the responsibility of the manager of the people. But the technical decisions that you make affect the team's effectiveness. The product decisions also affect the team's effectiveness. So the manager has a very unique role in that a lot of decisions that they may not have perfect influence over can really make a big difference in how well the team can run. And I think it's fairly common, therefore, that we actually have engineering managers who need to really understand those decisions, kind of both from a product side, but definitely from a technical side, in order to shape those decisions and make sure that we are focusing on the right things. Process does not solve all problems. One common failure mode of new managers, not all new managers, but this is definitely something that's happened, you've probably seen this, is the person who thinks that if they just rub the right magic process on things, the team is going to be excited. You just rub the right Kanban, Scrum, Agile, Waterfall magic, or the right developers just choose what they work on all the time magic. Now, all of those things actually have value in them. The value in a good process is that it gets information for you, right? Sometimes the information is what are developers excited about working on. Sometimes the information is how long is it taking to get certain features done. But information is not enough to actually make good decisions. You have to interpret the information that is coming up to you in order to be able to do your job well. Taste is an important part in being a good anything, right? As you become more of an expert in something, you start to have better taste. And taste is really simply attention to detail, understanding the signals that are bubbling up to you and what those signals mean. And that is one of those things that process can't teach you, but running process and understanding the engineering aspects of that process and merging those two things together, now all of a sudden you're starting to get somewhere. As I said, you've got your technical leads, you've got your product leads. You've got an app that has to go out next month. It has to go out because it's going to be featured on stage. Whatever, one of those Apple people is going to wave at it in the background, and everyone on your team is going to be like, that's my icon, so exciting, right? And it's going to be done. I think the nice thing about speaking to app developers is that you really appreciate the stress of having something that actually has a delivery deadline. And when you have the stress of a delivery deadline, you're always having to think about prioritization. What are we going to get done? What do we have to get done for this thing to get out? Product managers sometimes are great at it and sometimes aren't. Tech leads sometimes great at it, sometimes aren't. You sit in the middle of these two groups and you say, all right, I know product, you really want this feature, but I'm listening to the engineering team and it's just not realistic to get this done for this launch. What about this stripped down version? I know, head of engineering, you really want to rewrite everything in the latest release and all the latest libraries, but we just don't have time right now. But I promise you, let's get this version of the app done, and I have committed Q4. You get to do whatever you want from the technical perspective. Understanding what's missing, understanding what enough looks like. This is your job as an engineering manager. Okay, last but not least, do you understand what the team's actually doing? Do you understand the problems? In a fundamental level, do you actually understand the tech? Who's heard of manager telephone? Who's experienced manager telephone, right? You know what telephone is. Telephone is, you tell me, tell her, tell him, tell them, and the message always gets corrupted. Manager telephone is when you have a manager who doesn't add any value. They just go sit in a meeting, they listen to a bunch of things, they write a bunch of notes down, they come to you, they read those notes off the list, they write down what you say, they go back to the meeting, back and forth. Hopefully this doesn't happen to you all very often. But this is one of the most important reasons that we want to have technical managers, because those technical managers should, A, be able to answer some of the questions in whatever meeting they're in that you don't have to be in because you want to get work done and their time is not that valuable. So they should be able to actually understand the questions that are coming up in that meeting and answer some of them. You know what? It's just really not realistic for us to add yet another feature to this release. The team is already swamped, and that would actually require quite a bit of re-architecting to do well. On the flip side, sometimes your manager is not going to be able to answer those questions, and that's okay. But your manager should be able to ask you a much more specific question than the general question that came from whatever business person they were engaging with, right? You want your manager to be able to say, hey, you know what, could we just tweak this controller in order to do this magical thing, and now all of a sudden this notification is so much easier to send? I know. I don't know if any of that made any sense. I'm sorry. I really am not an iOS developer at all. But we don't want our managers playing telephone, right? We don't want our managers who have absolutely no value add back and forth. And that means you need managers who actually kind of understand technically what the team is working on. All right, so debugging, empathy, judgment. These are 3 important traits. So what else? Well, okay, it's not all roses, right? I think that the world in general has done a pretty good job of making it clear to folks that you need to actually be good with people, you need to care about people, there's people management skills that you need to worry about. So I'm not going to hammer on that, but I am going to hammer on a different thing, which is it's very easy when you have been a very hands-on engineer, you consider yourself a great engineer, and then you go into management, to forget over the years that you have forgotten a lot of what the day-to-day job of actually being an engineer is like. And you consider yourself very technical, very hands-on, you know all of your shit, and you start to get arrogant, and you start to push things on people that actually don't make any sense, right? You start to lose your edge. You have to stay humble. Right? If you're going to go on this path of being very technical and then becoming a manager and going hands-off, don't forget to stay humble. You've got to spend a little time continuing to learn, continuing to push yourself out of your comfort zone. You know, whether it's writing a little code occasionally on the weekends or maybe you're participating in Hack Day and actually writing code. I encourage everyone who's on the management path to keep abreast of changes in the fundamental ways that engineers do work. And certainly, if you are in the mobile world, you should be paying attention to all those different new mobile things that are coming out. You should be continuing to develop your expertise in the details of that world because it changes fast. And if you lose that technical edge in 5 years, all of a sudden, you are not that much more valuable than someone who just is really good at managing people.